Hey guys, it's your boy Davian. Welcome to my channel, and today I'm coming to give a review slash a little commentary on the debate between Cleo Manago, who is a black and human rights activist, I believe, and Dr. Umar Johnson. I was sent a link to their radio discussion. This conversation was supposed to be a full circle conversation about issues that affect the black community. It kind of got locked into the issue and subject of homosexuality. So I'm just going to come and give a review of that. And if you guys are interested in that, then stay tuned for this video. The link to the interview will be in the description bar below. Let's get into it. A friend of mine sent me a link to the interview that I'm talking about between Cleo Manago and Dr. Umar Johnson. I have a few videos on my channel regarding the gay agenda. When Empire hit, a lot of people were screaming about a gay agenda. I spoke on that. I'll leave that below. And I also got sent some material from Dr. Umar discussing some of his views and research into homosexuality. I also did a video on that. I'm going to leave a link below to that as well. But I'm coming to give some critiques of the interview itself, and to kind of just talk about certain points that were brought up in this discussion. Cleo Manago initially wanted to interview Dr. Umar about his school, about what he believes are the issues in the black community, about the effeminization of black men, etc. Dr. Umar kind of ripped the band-aid off of that by going directly into homosexuality. Obviously, homosexuality is a very complex and sensitive subject matter. It's one of those subjects that you can't just speak about for a minute and move on. It really takes dialogue because there's a lot of perspective, a lot of philosophy, a lot of science, a lot of opinion. So it takes a lot of precious time in going into this particular issue. This definitely was not the radio segment for that, because this was not an interview that was supposed to be about homosexuality. It was supposed to be about all of the different issues and realities that black people are having to live within, and why those realities are there, and what we can do to move away from some realities. I'm going to go over the cons of this conversation for one. I definitely agree with the callers that you took way too much time up in the interview. Dr. Umar was the guest, so I felt like he should have had more of the floor, because it's your radio show, so you have the platform on a daily basis to independently go into all of your personal views about the interview, about certain points that Dr. Umar brought up. But he was the guest, and I felt like we definitely didn't really get to even go into any of the other things concerning the black community. Another con for Cleo was he was a tad bit interruptive, but I can understand when you're in a conversation and not necessarily trying to debate somebody. Naturally in conversation, people interrupt each other, and that's not really taken as being rude necessarily, because that's just the way conversation flows naturally. But this was a radio interview. There was a listening audience. There is a structure of time. So Cleo, just bring your pen and your pad so you can have your notes as a reference to what you want to respond to. Cons for Dr. Umar. Dr. Umar initially, right out of the gate, seemed to have woken up on the wrong side of the bed. I don't know how early of a discussion or interview this was, but he sounded kind of very agitated, very aggressive, just coming out of the gate, very sassy and attitudey, as if he had a chip on his shoulder. He was very snappy towards Cleo and some of the other callers who were refuting or discrediting some of his perspectives and research. That was very interesting, because in the video that got brought up in that interview about the lesbian who confronted Dr. Umar, he called her out for the emotionalism behind the way she was projecting herself. But that same emotionalism was completely active in him during the first part of the interview. Another con with Dr. Umar being on was that Dr. Umar did not have a balanced perspective. He only looks at homosexuality through one lens, and that's the lens of sexual abuse, single-parent households, environmental influences, but he does not indulge in the other 5% of the gay population who has not been molested, who have been raised in two-parent households, both male and female present in the household, and who have had decent to privileged upbringings, who still come out to be homosexual. He does not really speak about that when he goes into these conversations, and I think that that's a little, and I think fundamentally that can be perceived as a character flaw, because as a seeker of truth, and maybe Dr. Umar is not necessarily interested in truth, Dr. Umar has a agenda, because when you tend to have a agenda, you tend to be specific and you tend to have a target in mind. When you are a seeker of truth, you are open-minded and you consider all the evidence, you consider all of the valid points made. You don't just isolate your perspective and make that perspective the perspective. You consider the rightness of other people's perspective. You bring that onto the table and you evaluate that and admit that into the court of law for further judgment and evaluation. I do agree with Cleo that the issue of leadership has to be questioned in Dr. Umar, because he is biased, he is one-sided, and that will skew his integrity as a leader and also skew his personal research, because he's going to perceive his studies through his perspective. So just like he was trying to say to Cleo that, hey Cleo, you can't separate yourself from the LGBT movement and then also be against the white agenda to effeminize black men, like you are gay and you're actively gay. So just like he believed that Cleo can't separate himself from the LGBT movement, well, Dr. Umar, you also can't separate your beliefs from your integrity as a leader. Now for the pros. I appreciate that Cleo Manago is not just a airy-fairy activist or homosexual activist. He has very intelligent rebuttals. He comes to very intelligent conclusions about things, and that he's open-minded and willing to also consider the points outside of his own fundamental beliefs about things. He was able to agree with Dr. Umar in things that Dr. Umar was saying that attribute to same-sex behavior or that attribute to effeminate behavior, and I really appreciated that about Cleo Manago, because that represents a truth seeker. He did well in having fair and balanced perspective and also being open-minded to opposing arguments and being able to bring that into the evidence box as well. Cleo also did a great job at respecting the callers, who, had it been me, I probably would have dealt with some of the motherfuckers a different kind of way, the mute button. But he did really well in terms of respecting the callers who were trying to call him out, who were trying to, not even constructively, just criticize him to criticize him, and criticizing the LGBT community as well. Another pro was Cleo was very aware that the platform for this type of conversation probably needed to happen in another setting where there was a mediator, where there was a narrator, and him and Dr. Umar could just focus on this particular topic itself and have a rational discussion. I also appreciate the fact that Cleo Manago did not kiss Dr. Umar's ass in order to keep Dr. Umar in that fucking interview. He stood up to Dr. Umar. He held his position while at the same time maintaining his respect and decency toward Dr. Umar. So I appreciated Cleo for not being afraid of Dr. Umar hanging up the goddamn phone and moving right along if that's what he wanted to do. The pros for Dr. Umar in the interview was that Dr. Umar had practical and logical, intelligent conclusions and research and ideas about homosexuality and where it comes from and why it is. So I appreciate the fact that Dr. Umar was just not another ignorant, homophobic person spewing a bunch of bullshit and rhetoric and ignorance, but that he actually had what could be looked at as reasonable explanations for effeminization, for femininity in black men, for homosexuality in general. So I appreciate the fact that his arguments were somewhat intelligent and logical and reasonable. That was definitely a breath of fresh air, because I have debated pro black activists who are anti-LGBT, and these motherfuckers are as far from Dr. Umar in terms of a presentation as the moon is from the goddamn sun. So it was nice to see a intelligent rebuttal against homosexuality, because I'm all for disagreeing. I feel like we all have the right to disagree. It's only my hope that we will be a people who intelligently disagree, and that we don't minimize people's realities or minimize people's experiences, but that if we're going to disagree, that we are well informed and while we're disagreeing, and that we are evaluating and having a premise for disagreeing other than out of fear, other than out of ignorance and not really knowing what the fuck is going on, and just being well researched and studied. If you're going to disagree intelligent. In part 2 of the interview, Dr. Umar did get his attitude together. I was able to enjoy him more in the second part of the interview, which happened the next day, I believe. Maybe this interview happened a lot later in the day. Dr. Umar was able to get the fuck up, wash his face, scrub the gunk out of his goddamn eye, and be well prepared for the interview. He sound a lot more warm, a lot more sound, a lot less emotional, and just a lot more present in the conversation without all the tood, because he was giving me sassy black woman in part 1 of the interview. So I really enjoyed him seeming to be more together and less emotionally involved in the conversation, but more focused mentally in the conversation. I also appreciate the fact that Dr. Umar holds to the position that he does not support homosexuality, but he does not support the hurt and harm of any persons, especially any melanated person. And I do believe that you can disagree with a person or disagree with a thing and still have love and have a sense of respect for individuals. A few points about some of the points made in the interview, and like I said, the link is below. You guys can go watch it after you watch this video if you so choose. But something that keeps coming up is the gay agenda, and the gay agenda is propagated by white supremacy, who has a motivation to effeminize the black male, because the effeminized, feminine, docile black man is not a threat to the patriarchal, masculine, white system that America sits upon currently. And what I want to say about the gay agenda and it being propagated by white people to further oppress and target black men and black women is that I believe this issue is out of context. Initially, when rape took place during slavery, where slave masters sodomized black slaves before their own children, before their peers, before other black slaves, that this was used as a form of torture and dominance. At the time that white slave masters were raping black men and sodomizing black men before their own community, white men were not intelligent enough to think in terms of strategically effeminizing black men. This rape was used as a means to display white dominance, white superiority, and rape was not the only form of dominance that white slave masters practiced during the time of slavery. They also whipped black people, both men and women. They also raped the black woman and impregnated her as well. They held black people captive, chained them up, and they also thought that black people were 1/3 of a human being. So we know that these people didn't even have the intellectual capacity to even think in terms of the effeminization of a whole group of people. These things was just to humiliate black men and women, and white supremacy did that by any means necessary, which is why they were so creative in their torture methods when it came to black people. They hung them, they lynched them, they beat them, they pillaged them. They did all these things. None of these things were necessarily about strategy. They were motivated by hate for brown people and oppression of brown people physically. Homosexuality and sodomizing and rape were used as an expression of white dominance and authority onto brown people. And they raped all people, both men and women. I see a hypocrisy in terms of black people wanting to attribute homosexuality to Europeans, while at the same time also attributing hip-hop in its current state to the white community, saying that white supremacy is responsible for why the music in hip-hop has changed, why the music has become more criminal, has become more negative, why the word nigga has been neutralized and made socially acceptable, that this is all the doing to white supremacy. So on one hand, you cannot accuse white people of propagating hypermasculinity within the black community and using black men to oppress other black men, and then also attribute homosexuality and the effeminization of black men also to that same white supremacy system. They contradict each other. Why would white supremacy be interested in making black men weak by making them gay, quote unquote, and by also making them weak by making them look at themselves as more of a man than what they are and behave in these hyper-masculine, hyper-aggressive ways, which is what we see a lot in urban black settings and in a lot of the art and music within the black community. These two realms contradict one another, and that's because one of these worlds don't exist, and it's this one. White people are not propagating the effeminization of black men. White people, however, may be propagating the most negative aspects of the black community and exploiting those negative characteristics, exploiting that oppression, exploiting that underdevelopment, and marketing that, making money off of hip-hop, making money off of the rap game, while allowing black people to dig themselves into a further ditch. That actually may be true. So I do not agree with Cleo Manago, who agreed with Dr. Umar that there is a white agenda to effeminize black men. I don't agree with that. But overall, the interview was really good. I encourage you guys to go and watch it. You can give your feedback to me in this video on what you thought about the conversation. I would love to see Cleo Manago and Dr. Umar sit down on a different platform and have a conversation that targets sexuality itself. Cleo Manago is definitely intelligent enough to speak sound perspective on both sides of the coin, and Dr. Umar is also a representation for blacks, for those blacks who are crying out for justice in the black community, for upliftment and liberation. And I think that these two individuals do have the capacity to facilitate a very informed and intelligent conversation about the issue of sexuality and homosexuality within the black community. So thank you, Cleo Manago and Dr. Umar, for the conversation. I believe I know where Dr. Umar's heart is and what he's trying to do for black people, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate any black man who is trying to do anything constructive for the black community. We don't have enough Umars and enough black people actually out here trying to make moves. I know that a lot of people dislike Dr. Umar, think he's a fraud and everything else. I don't know whether he's a fraud. I don't know anything about that. But in terms of just the surface and what it looks like, I can appreciate what he's saying, what he's doing, and the lengths he's attempting to go to in order to put black people in a better place within themselves and amongst one another. So, Cleo Manago, keep up the good work. I hope y'all make that conversation happen for sure. Thanks for this interview. If you guys like this video, rate, share, and comment. And I will talk to you guys later. One.